participation over the last few weeks and forwarding additional information, comments, and questions for our comprehensive plan, as well as the strategic plan as well. Really appreciate the thoughtfulness, the consideration of many factors, some of which we probably have on our table, but others on our plate, others we will consider as we go through today. Today's discussion is about a consideration of a significant portion of the comments and questions that have been provided for us. Certainly, we'll try to get to all of them. You have until 23rd of this month to continue to send additional information. We are scheduled to adopt a comprehensive plan by December the 1st. So today's discussion would not conclude all of the things that we may or may not do before we provide a plan for the first. But it will cover substantially a good portion of many of the what I consider to be essential questions and comments that people have raised. Some, as I've said in the past, are matters for the state board to consider. Others may be outside what we want to consider in terms of making major legislative changes. Again, this is not to suggest that at some point along the way, we will in fact make some legislative changes. That's inevitable over a period of time. However, it is our intent today to try to adopt and to implement the plan with fidelity to ensure that, at least as we start off, that we're trying to comply with what the General Assembly wanted us to do. There are some changes that obviously must be made, and we will consider those. But it is not about drafting, rewriting the legislation completely at this time with major changes. Having said that, Rachel, let me go through today's agenda in terms of the time frame for future meetings. Would you like to comment on that right quickly? And also make sure that we introduced all of the members who are with us today.
Sure. You did an excellent job of summarizing that, Mr. Chair. And when we get to the slide deck, we do have a little more information around the timelines and next steps, and also for anyone who would like to provide written feedback that hasn't already or wants to provide more, we have links and actually a QR code if you want to read all of the testimony that we've received to date. So we do have all the members present here today. Would you like me to go through? Okay. So we have Vice Chair Kerwin and members Dr. Doss, Dr. Lynch, Dr. Stapleton, Mr. Manco, and Mr. Harris. Should we move into, is there any more?
Yeah, Dr. Stapleton had raised some questions about the process as well, and they may be relevant to our discussion today to make sure that we have incorporated her concerns. Dr. Stapleton, did you want to raise more of that, or are you satisfied with the process and procedures that were discussed earlier? Because I think we raised a significant question about the process.
I think you may be referring to just understanding how we would all share our feedback.
Right.
And how we can all get an idea of what each other is thinking, given that these meetings are bounded in time. I wanted some kind of clarification on the Open Meetings Act and how we can all understand our each other's opinions.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Well, why don't we get started, and let's go to the first section. And I think we have them organized in terms of what we consider at this point in time. Now, let me ask the question, Rachel, if someone had a daunting question or issue or concern as we're speaking today, is it possible for us to look at that or consider that as we go along?
Do you mean board members?
No, outside board members.
So we're continuing to take written feedback and written testimony to the email address. So If there's any immediate feedback based on today's discussion, I think we would just suggest that folks either send an email to the AIB at maryland.gov or go to the feedback form on the website aib.maryland.gov and provide any other feedback. And we're monitoring that very closely.
Okay.
And to Dr. Stapleton's questions, obviously, the Open Meetings Act means that anytime there's a quorum of members participating in any kind of discussion, including an email chain or things like that, that's considered a public meeting. So we've provided for some opportunities for members to essentially share their feedback with the staff, and then the staff is taking that feedback and sort of synthesizing it and trying to bring it back to you in the form of proposed changes or potential changes. We have some for you today that we'll go through, but would just encourage that we continue to use that process. And obviously we can have some side meetings and discussions, which we have been having with, I've been talking with individual members. So we absolutely will continue to do that as we move towards our December 1st deadline to adopt the initial comprehensive plan.
Yes. Let me also acknowledge and thank the state board staff for their continued work and cooperation with us. We have been working closely with them. There have been a number of meetings and conferences with them to try to help us come together on some of the ideas and suggestions. And the superintendent and his staff have worked diligently with us to try to narrow down the focus of the questions so that we can make certain that we address all of them. So again, thank them for their work and cooperation.
Definitely.
Okay, let's get started then.
Oh, Dr. Stapleton had her hand.
I just had a quick question. Rachel, you mentioned the December 1st deadline, and Britt and I had talked earlier this week in preparation for me joining a fabulous Maryland Assessment Group conference tomorrow.
Yes.
And is the December 1st deadline, is that a hard deadline, or is that something that we have imposed on ourselves?
That is the deadline in the statute
Okay.
for the AIB to adopt the initial plan.
Yes, so we have an awful lot of work between now and the first. Okay.
And just to be
Let me
clear,
back up. That's the time for adoption.
yes, exactly. Thank you.
You may not have the printed detailed copy out available for everyone on December the 1st, so that do not expect to have a hard copy in your hand by the stroke of midnight, December the 1st.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for clarifying that. Yes. So I imagine that there will be a number of additional changes that are discussed at the meeting on December 1st. So staff will need time to incorporate those into the document. And we also are working with a vendor to actually, design and produce the actual plan document, both for the PDF, and then ultimately we'll have printed hard copies of that. So it will take a few days to get to that point where we can release a PDF.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Okay, ready?
All right. Emma, can you share your screen with the slides, please? And thank you. Okay, so let's go to this slide. Excellent. So this is just a summary of where we are. As you all know, we released the draft initial plan in late October, and then working with MSDE staff very diligently, we revised the LEA blueprint implementation plan template and the criteria for success and released those in early November. Last week, we held a public hearing, and at that,
Rachel?
yes,
Before you go on, and maybe this comes up earlier, but I just want to be sure I understand. The implementation plan template, this is a draft, and the LE criteria for success. Well, are those two documents draft, and are we expected at some point to approve them?
yes, they are draft, and yes, you will need to approve the final form on December 1st.
So that will be approved along with the blueprint implementation plan. Okay.
Yes, and we are going to talk about that like in the next slide, actually.
Good.
A little more. Okay. So we had 49 individuals who testified at last week's public hearing on both the initial draft plan, and we did receive some comments on the revised LEA template and criteria for success. We also have received to date 108 pieces of written testimony that has been emailed to the AIB, or feedback through the feedback form that is posted on the AIB website. So we're getting lots of public input and some very constructive comments. Next slide. And so, as you were just asking, the blueprint materials include the draft plan itself, and then the LEA template and the LEA criteria for success. They're all still in draft form, and one question that has come up, and just to clarify here publicly, for the LEAs, the only thing that they will need to submit to the AIB and to MSDE is the template. So this middle document here is the template, and that is the only thing that they will need to actually submit on March 15th. And we are holding feedback sessions right now with the LEAs to get additional input on changes that are concerns, questions around where there might need to be some clarification to the template or the criteria for success. And we're working with MSDE then to take that feedback into account and come back to you all with proposed changes to the template and the criteria for success for the final adoption on December 1st.
So Rachel, another question. Yeah, we've talked about targets and benchmarks and goals, et cetera. And I know later on we're going to talk about that and the timeline for developing them. But will they be included in the criteria for success, or is the criteria for success sort of a bigger picture discussion of what will be success?
So the criteria for success, what we're all calling the initial, so it's the initial plan, it's the initial template, it's the initial criteria for success. That is only will apply to the March 2023 submission. And so the targets and timelines and those kinds of things don't come into play yet in this first initial plan that we're asking the LEAs and other entities to submit. So there will be a new or additional criteria for success that will need to be developed and approved for next year's, the March 2024 submission.
And that would that include targets?
It likely would, yes.
All right, thank you.
Because the March 24 plans are going to cover the initial plans are only covering the next, essentially the current school year and next school year. Then the March 24 submissions are going to cover through the 26-27 school year. So the
Gotcha.
targets and progress would definitely be part of the criteria for success as we move past the March 24 submission.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Rachel, can I just ask
Rachel,
a
just a
clarifying
quick-
question about that, though?
Sure.
This is Jennifer. So when you talk about those metrics, I think we're talking about, we will still have qualitative metrics in the 24 submission. It's not like we're not asking for any sort of criteria of success or any metrics, but we're asking for more quantitative coming 26. Is that correct?
So the initial plan that is due in March of 2023 is primarily qualitative. And that is what this criteria for success, these two documents on the screen, reflect. As part of the template, we are asking LEAs to submit baseline data and also actual data and estimates for 1 year, just to get a sense of what they are thinking in terms of where they are now and where they're going to be, what they're working towards for the next school year. So that is the March 23 submission. And so there will be data and collected as part of the process. But the criteria,
right?
I'm sorry.
That's just basic. That's just essentially the baseline.
Essentially. And then, but the criteria for success, the draft criteria for success, are very focused on the qualitative pieces of the plan in this first submission. It's not that we won't be collecting data, it's just that the criteria for success are more focused on qualitative measures around having plans to do things, having thought about things, having developed policies and procedures to move forward in implementing the various pillars of the blueprint. The March 24 submission will cover through the 26-27 school year. And so that submission will, we're kind of getting ahead of things, but we will identify the metrics and targets by August of 2023 in the updated blueprint comprehensive plan, which will then, all the LEAs and the other state and local entities will have that information and know what the expectations are, so that when they develop their plans for the next 5 years that they will submit in March of 24, they will know the expectations. And then there will be additional data collected. And then as we move forward in the process each year of reviewing plans and determining whether LEA funds are released or not released, whether the LEAs are actually meeting the targets will become a factor in whether funds are released or not.
Rachel, one more question, if I could. We've gotten a lot of feedback on the draft implementation plan, and we're going to talk about that today. And so that will lead to some modifications of it. What has been the process for collecting feedback on the LEA implementation plan template and the criteria for success? And how will those documents be revised? Since we'll have to consider that on December 1st as well.
So a couple different ways. They were, anyone was welcome to provide testimony on them last week at the public hearing. They can also submit written testimony through the AIB email address or fill out the feedback form and specify in the form that their comments are related to parts of the template. In addition to that, we are holding 3 feedback sessions with the local superintendents and blueprint coordinators and really whoever the superintendents would like to include in these feedback sessions. We're holding these AIB and MSDE to solicit additional questions and feedback from the school systems. And we have our final feedback session is tomorrow morning, I believe. And then we will be talking with MSDE staff and working on suggested revisions to the template and criteria for success that we would then bring to you all for adoption on December 1st.
Thank you.
Sure. I also saw a couple of other hands, which are no longer there. So, but feel free. Okay. So I should move on. Okay. So the next slide is just based on some of the comments at the public hearing and feedback. We thought it was helpful to just sort of reiterate what the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan's purpose is. And sort of by saying what it is, you know, sort of we're also sort of the flip of it is what it is not. But I mean, ultimately, the Blueprint law required the AIB to develop a comprehensive implementation plan that would guide the implementation of the law over the implementation period, and would integrate the expectations and requirements of the law across both all the various state agencies and entities that are involved in the implementation, as well as at the local level, which is primarily the LEAs, but also includes local workforce development boards, local health departments, local departments of social services. There are, you know, local community colleges, as well as state higher education institutions that are involved. And so, and of course, the private sector, when we get into the CTE committee and the health department around the consortium. So, you know, the goal of the plan is to sort of lay it all out for all the different entities that have a role and a part in implementing the blueprint, and try to sort of bring clarity as to what needs to be done and what the expectations are.
So Rachel, would you say that the targets and goals are embedded in some of these bullets? The setting of targets are embedded, because that is a role of the AIB. So are they embedded in something? That would be under the key requirements or what?
It's definitely part of the plan, is to set milestones and targets. Absolutely.
So I just thought that ought to be mentioned somewhere in this, but
yeah, it's on another slide, but that's a really good point. That's absolutely part of the purpose of the plan, is to identify how, what measures are going to be used to assess progress. And it's just on another slide, but it absolutely is part of the purpose.
good, thank you.
I think it might be on the next slide, actually. If we want to move to that, Emma.
Rachel, can you just hold on that
sure.
on that previous slide for just a second? Because the last bullet, when it says pursue transformational strategies to implement elements of the blueprint, including through technical assistance, can we just sort of talk about that a little bit? Because I do think that is a point that I think that we need to focus on a little bit. Is it, what is the role of the AIB in terms of both encouraging and requiring those transformational practices?
And when you say what is the role?
Well, I think one of the things that we've heard from those who have given feedback is the expectation that the comprehensive implementation plan would be more prescriptive. And I think one of the things that we want to acknowledge as the AIB, I assume, is that we want our local systems to be able to evaluate their resources, their needs, what they are ready to implement and what they are going to need more support with in order to start to move the blueprint forward. At the same time, there is questions happening from the systems about how do I do, what is transformational? How am I getting that done? And so I think there is this space where it's a little bit unclear about the role of MSDE and the role of the AIB in both bringing those transformational strategies to local education agencies, as well as what is the requirement, who is going to sort of be on that accountability space saying, we have the expectation of transformation.
Sure. If you wouldn't mind if we do go to the next slide, just because it speaks to some of what you're raising. We did try to sort of summarize at a pretty high level the roles and responsibilities around blueprint implementation, just specifically focused with MSDE and the LEAs. And essentially, the AIB's role is to set the what has to be done and by when, and those milestones, many of them are in the law, but there are other targets that still need to be set, and what the outcomes are, what the expected outcomes are, what the goals are, what we're going to be holding everyone accountable for, and then how we're going to assess whether implementation is happening with
But
fidelity.
we're not fully engaged at the local level on the how, though, are we?
Exactly. Right, exactly. So AIB is mostly about the what, although it does get into the gray area, and we probably could have put some gray area between AIB and MSDE, and then MSDE and LEAs. And it maybe should be a circle, because then there's LEAs and AIB. But the part of the AIB's role is to monitor whether the blueprint is being implemented with fidelity. And the with fidelity part crosses into the how, but in the sense of at a monitoring level, not at a prescriptive setting specific things that are the only way to get to the what. And so the how is really in the MSDE's role and responsibilities, and then also the LEAs. And they need to, both at the MSDE level and the LEA level, determine how they're going to implement the policies and practice in order to achieve the blueprint's goals. In many cases, there are things that are, the detail's not all there, right? And that's the how, and that's where there's local control is certainly a big part of the U.S. education system, and providing the flexibility for LEAs to, within their own local needs and local context, to figure out how they think is the best approach to implementing what the blueprint is asking for, and putting that in their plans, which will then be subject to review and recommendation by MSDE and review and approval or not by AIB. So it's sort of a feedback loop, to put it that way.
Although the first bullet under AIB, Rachel, does suggest that we have some role in at least identifying strategies and making, so there is.
It's definitely, that's the great, yes, absolutely. Not only, and we also have specific funding to help provide that information and support to both MSDE and the LEAs. Absolutely. I see a couple of hands up. I think Mr. Manco was first.
Yeah, so first off, I want to apologize. I'm going to be off camera because it seems like my Zoom is having some problems, but
Okay.
as long as it's steady, then I will try to stay on. But I guess my presumption is, after the release of the finalization of the plan, a large portion of the AIB's role over the next couple months is going to be serving in this role of providing technical assistance, thought partnership, helping LEAs and other entities figure out the how, or at least give them some best practices, help them think through what is actionable within their context, and that in and of itself is a heavy lift that I think is going to come very quickly. So just wanted to get a sense from you, and if you had any updates on where MSDE is on this in terms of the rollout of these technical assistance sessions, how built out that structure is, if we have consultant support around that, or what the plan is to provide an apparatus to help these various entities unpack and elevate what is promising in the how they're going to go through and make the what actionable.
Yeah, absolutely. Technical assistance is a huge part of what needs to come next, and even now, as part of supporting the LEAs in developing their plans. We have had some preliminary discussions with MSDE about that. MSDE has certainly laid out a series of TA sessions around making sure that the LEAs understand what the template is asking for, and what they need to include in the template in their plans. And then we've also been talking about putting together some sessions to really focus on certain key policy areas where I think the LEAs, and we've asked the LEAs as we've been going through the working sessions in the process, in terms of what technical assistance would be helpful for them in terms of what the how looks like. And I think some examples of that are definitely the career ladder, implementation of the CCR post CCR pathways, and the support pathway. Pre-K is expansion of full day pre-K is obviously a huge topic that requires a lot of additional support. And this is not an all-inclusive list. What does the non-instructional time for teachers, look like? How do you organize the school day to accomplish that and support that? So we have had those types of preliminary conversations with MSDE, and we will be obviously focusing much more on that. I think we have a meeting scheduled on Monday, I believe. So it's definitely very high on our radar. And then, both MSD has a consultant, AIB has a consultant, and I think we need to talk about whether we need to bring others in, whether we, I think one of what the AIB has been doing, and I think like with the teacher prep work group and with some of our working sessions, bringing experts in to, share best practices, share visions of what the how could look like. I think that we're certainly in a space where we could continue to host convenings like that to support sort of the strategic planning and the visioning, if that's a word. It's probably not. So absolutely, I think we will come back to you all with a proposal for TA.
Yeah. I would also say, I think there is high value in bringing in outside experts, but, I think also relying and providing a structure so that LEAs can support each other in this work.
Yes.
There are clearly, like, if you think of something like pre-K expansion, there are some LEAs that are much farther along and others and have a lot of lessons learned, things that can be shared, pitfalls that they would avoid if they could do it over again, that could help, they could help in the kind of implementation strategy for LEAs that are less far along in certain aspects of the work.
Absolutely. And I think anytime we have a convening, that's been, I think that's a very powerful, just the convening itself and being in the space and the dedicated time to talk about it and to share strategies, I think is very useful for the LEAs.
And
Dr. Stapleton?
yeah, I just wanted to throw my support behind it. So far, I'm getting the impression that we're more accountability than implementation. And I would really like us to speed up the focus that we have on the implementation side. There's a substantial sum of money every year that is in our budget for technical assistance. And I do think that we need more of a structure than the convening with a speaker. I think we need a place where the LEAs can reach out for specialized assistance. So as
Yes.
we can get that structure in place, the sooner the better.
Yes. And I take your point. Absolutely. I will say that AIB staff and MSDE staff are meeting. It was twice a month with the blueprint coordinators, implementation coordinators with the LEAs, and we've now ramped that up to weekly. So we are, regularly interacting with the LEAs and trying to respond to their questions and concerns, on a very regular basis. So I just don't want the impression to be that we're not trying to support implementation, because absolutely, it's all about successful implementation. All right. I don't see any other hands. Should we move on to starting to talk about some of the feedback that we did get from the public hearing and the testimony so far?
Mhm.
And so the first topic relates to what we've already touched on, but we'll dive deeper here into what the initial plan includes, and then what the plans are in terms of outcomes and metrics. So right now, the initial draft blueprint comprehensive plan, which is what that BCP acronym is, it includes the key milestones that are expected over the 10-year implementation period. These include specific milestones that are set out in the law, and in some cases, if not set out in the law, that were set out in the Commission on Innovation and Excellence report. So we've got our key milestones in the draft plan. And then we also have a set of expected outcomes for the blueprint overall and for each pillar, as well as outcome measures that would be used to assess whether the expected outcomes are being reached. And then we also have, so below the pillar level for each objective, we have some draft outcome measures for each objective. What we don't have in the draft are, those are draft measures and expected outcomes. So obviously we need to finalize the actual verbiage there. And then what we don't have are what the outcome, the metrics that will be used to actually assess So the outcome measures sort of lay out there like a statement. And then you need to identify the actual metric and data sets that will be used to define that outcome measure. And then also the targets, the expected progress around that objective, let's say, if we talk about the pillar objectives, and what the expectation or the target will be for each of the measures in which years. And there needs to be discussion about, is it annual targets? Is it, periodic targets? I mean, all those things need to be discussed. So that's not in the draft plan right now. And part of the reason that it's not is because we're sort of in this, aside from, the compressed timeline that we're all operating under here. We also, the ground has shifted since the blueprint law was initially passed in 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic and the learning loss suffered by students and other impacts of COVID-19 on students and families and educators, is ongoing. And so we're not as clear about where we are today as we were back in 2019 when the work was being done, except that we're, for the most part, in a worse place for many students. And so it's very difficult to set targets until you have baseline data. And so part of the process for the initial plan that will be submitted in March of 23 is to get that baseline data and that baseline, not just data, but sort of where are we starting from in a programmatic place, as well as a looking at actual data. And so so that is one of the reasons why the targets are not part of the draft plan.
Well, we had a number of comments on this particular subject matter. And I thought that there was at least explanation in what we had submitted, indicating that that is forthcoming. And that we would not, in effect, delay the time frame for submission of that information with our somewhat delayed process of laying it all out in terms of the baseline and taking into consideration where we are today. Can you square that with what we've stated and what we plan to put into the plan now that would address those concerns?
So yes, so we did try to explain in the draft plan what was in there and what wasn't and why. I think some of that maybe was not noticed, shall we say, but we didn't provide the detail about the plan for how we're going to accomplish what is a very important and critical part of the work that needs to be done. And so the plan is to, and I guess, can we go to the next slide? And Dr. Lynch, is your question, I don't want to move on a slide if your question is very focused on the previous slide.
No, I'm okay.
Well, I think they're probably related. If we can just go back to that previous slide just for one second, though, because I just want to make sure that for people who are watching this today, that we're all clear and that I'm clear. So we're collecting baseline data for this year, but then we are updating outcomes and outcome measures in August of 23. And some of that is part of a general reflective and refinement process of, we gather data, we look at what we have, we're reflecting and refining at all times. I guess one of the things that I am not clear about is how do LEAs know what data they should be collecting if we are not clear on the outcome measures that we are expecting? How is that alignment happening, I guess?
Well, right now in the template, MSDE had identified a series of data points, data tables that they wanted the LEAs to provide. And it's some of the data is so it's in the template. There are these data tables that are call for projections. And so it's sort of what you would think of as the obvious data points in terms of, you know, projections on the number of kindergarten slots that they'll have available, projections on kindergarten readiness projections, and keeping in mind that for the initial plan, originally the projections were for 5 years in this first plan. We're only asking for 1 year. So the current 21-22, the current 22-23 school year, and then next school year. So it's only those 3 years of data that are being requested for any of the data points right now. But for each pillar, there are a series of data tables that MSDE identified as wanting to collect from the LEAs. We have gotten some feedback that in some cases, those data points are not data that the LEAs have submitted previously. And so there is some work to be done around defining the data that is wanting to be collected so that it is consistently provided by the LEAs. And there has also been feedback that for some of the data, the MSD already has the data and that perhaps the LEAs don't need to submit it. So that's some of the feedback that we're getting from the LEAs that we'll be discussing with MSDE and talking about potential changes to try to streamline the process for the LEAs. But ultimately, the baseline data that coming in the template are, what's the best way to put this? Estimations of the data that would be needed to align with the outcome measures and then the metrics that will be needed to set the targets. But also outside of the LEA implementation plans, there can also be data sets that are identified that we aren't asking the LEAs necessarily to report on in their plans as we go through the process that we're going to talk about in a minute to identify the outcome measures, metrics, and targets.
So it sounds to me like MSDE is really driving the data identification and data collection. What is the role of the AIB in identifying what the data metrics are and reviewing that? You know, we've had these wonderful series around our comprehensive implementation plan. And I'm wondering if there needs to be some sort of public conversations around those data metrics as well to make sure that they're fully aligned.
Yes, I think you have teed up the next slide very well. And so that is exactly the plan, so to speak, plan in quotes here, is to using our very successful model that we've done for developing the comprehensive plan and what is in it to date. This would include creating a work group that would facilitate looking at the outcome measures that are identified in the initial plan, refining those words where necessary, and then developing metrics and proposing targets to measure implementation progress. And the intent would be that this would be a really broadly representative work group. It would include, of course, AIB and MSDE, LEAs, the longitudinal data system, higher ed, academia, experts in data, and also making sure that as we set our outcome measures and targets, that we are keeping, equity in very front of mind, and potentially including a racial equity consultant. That was some feedback that we received earlier on. And specifically Dr. Toldson, who was also a consultant to the Kerwin Commission. So that would be something that the work group might consider including. And then I'll just run through all of this, and then we can discuss and answer questions. And then the intent would be that that this work group would do the work, develop the proposals that would then come forward and be part of a series of working sessions, similar to what we did over the summer. And that would be in the spring and early summer of 2023. And then the goal would be that the AIB would then adopt the outcome measures, metrics, and targets as part of the updated comprehensive plan in August. And so each year the AIB has the opportunity, it's not required to update the comprehensive plan, but it may do so. And if it does, it has to adopt by August 1st of each year is the update. So that is the proposal. Yes.
Let me get to point 5, which is this would not delay the blueprint implementation for March 23. Could you highlight that again for us, please?
Sure. So, essentially, and I said this earlier also, so the initial plans that the LEAs are submitting in March of 23 are really focused on the next couple of years, and really establishing a baseline and plans. The March of 24 submission is where we're going to be asking the LEAs to provide their plans out through the 26-27 school year, and provide, and at that point, they will know what the targets, what the expectations are, because we will have adopted those in August as part of the update to the plan. And so in the March of 24 submission, they will know what the expectations are for that time period, and they will need to, their plans will need to provide detail about how they will meet those targets, whatever they end up being. And then at that point, as the AIB and MSD go through their process of reviewing and approving plans and releasing funds, the release of funds, I think beginning in fiscal 26, the release of funds decision by the AIB is in the statute. Part of that decision is related to whether expected progress is being made.
I think we should take a little more time on this section, because if there are any questions about this, because we had a great deal of discussion from a number of entities, highly respected, about this particular point, believing that the AIB, the plan itself, was woefully insufficient because we did not lay out in precise details how we were going to achieve the objectives, and that we did not have sufficient information therein, and that it really was a huge setback not to have this. And so if there are any questions or issues about what is being suggested here to address that particular question, I think members need to weigh in on this particular point, because it is a very significant point in our plan in response to the questions that were raised by a number of witnesses and organizations that submitted information to us.
So Rachel, you're going to call on people whose hands are up?
Oh, yes, let me check, let me check my, let's see. So I think, actually, Dr. Kerwin, you are
Yes.
next.
So I'm glad we are focused on this point. You know, I think it's been clarified that AIB will be the responsible body for, in consultation for sure, but the responsibility for establishing the metrics and the goals, the metrics, the targets for as we go through the implementation. This did come up, and I'm glad, you know, I think that's been pretty well clarified. Now, one question I have, if I understand this correctly, is we're going to put out some targets in the initial implementation, and then we're going to appoint a group to help advise us and provide feedback, and we're going to modify those targets. Did I get that right, Rachel?
The word targets.
All right, well, metrics.
So we haven't actually identified metrics. What we've done is we've identified the outcome measures. And in words.
Right.
Like the achievement gap will be closed.
Okay, but we won't be saying by how much at this time.
Correct.
Okay, when will we say that?
By August of 2023.
Okay, and so we're not actually putting numbers in the initial draft. We have a placeholder for those numbers. Is that correct?
Essentially, yeah. I want to that's essentially correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I was concerned that we were actually putting numbers that we were going to then, in a few months later, change, and I thought that didn't make good sense to me. So I like what you've said, that we'll have the placeholder with the understanding that we will develop, in consultation with others, the numbers that will go into the implementation plan.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of some examples of what's in the plan. I think we have there's a statement around kindergarten readiness. You know, obviously the objective of pillar 1 is ultimately that that students come to kindergarten ready to learn.
Right.
But we haven't said yet what that means, what the expectation is at full implementation,
right,
and what that means along the way yet. So we haven't, but we've stated the overall goal,
right,
which is we want students to come to kindergarten ready to learn. And that's why we're investing in early childhood education.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Stapleton?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I'd like, if folks aren't familiar with a logic model, I think we really need to think about this as a logic model. And in a logic model, you have, let's say there's 6 columns. The first column is, what are the resources that are available or expected to be available to address a certain issue? The second column is, what activities are supposed to be occurring to address this issue? The third is, what are the outputs, which are more quantitative, seats filled kind of thing. And then I guess it's 5 columns. And then there may be short-term outcomes or medium-term outcomes and long-term outcomes. I think with this blueprint process, it's a really interesting conundrum, because the commission has resulted in a long-term outcome. So that last column is filled. There's the goal there, that the long-term column is filled. As well as the second column, which is the activities that are supposed to happen. So we think that having more Judy centers is going to result in something, and so what I believe really needs to happen is for us to fill in, and some of this will happen at the LEA level, some of it will happen at C level, but to fill in that first column of what resources are we assuming exist? What resources are we providing as part of the blueprint funding? And then we can measure whether activities are occurring as they're supposed to be. That's sort of the accountability piece. And those outcomes, those direct outcomes are in fact the slots available in pre-K, et cetera. But we really have to work on the short-term and medium-term outcome measures. And that's where the work hasn't been done, I think.
Yes.
So I think in the LEA implementation plans, the tables that collect data, I think those are really focusing on those outputs. Like, all right, if you're doing this, then there should be this many slots filled. And so I think that that's not going to be the key area that we're focused on. But and earlier I had my hand up and put it down, but I want to address, at some point you said if targets haven't been reached on, I think, some of these outcomes, then there may be withholding of funds. And I think that's a huge assumption that the activities that were defined will result in the desired outcomes. I think that's a really big assumption that we would be making if we're withholding funds. But I think that's probably a conversation to have over the spring and summer. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I just, I actually literally pulled up the statute just to make sure that I was, so I'm just literally what the statute says is beginning in fiscal 26, the AIB shall consider releasing funds if, and there's a series of things related to MSDE's recommendation, CTE committee recommendation, expert review team recommendation, or the board determines that a public school or local school system has not made sufficient progress on an implementation plan or taken appropriate steps to improve student performance. So it is part of the inputs that will affect your decision, but it is ultimately the board's decision. So that's all I was trying to convey. And I absolutely, I think you're spot on with all of your comments there. Dr. Lynch?
And I think sort of building on what Dr. Stapleton was saying is that and hearing what you just said, there's really two different things that we should be measuring. One is actually the change in student outcomes in some way, but the other is implementation, because student outcomes will be much more lagging, especially when you're looking at outcomes that are based upon access to pre-K, access to all of these other services, community services, and everything that will be provided along the way. And so we may not see the full benefit for several years until students have had ample access to all of those opportunities and resources along the way. And so the challenge becomes, what are we measuring to accurately assess the work that's being done in and actually realizing those resources and implementing the blueprint. And so part of what I come back to is thinking about the sort of large task of LEAs right now to have a plan put together by March, and to be giving us a lot of data that I am not sure where or how we will be using this in the future. And it feels like perhaps we should be really thoughtful that we aren't asking LEAs to collect data for data's sake, unless we know that this is a metric that we are going to be measuring in the long term. And I think we have to be ready to push back a bit against, we've always collected this metric of data because this is what we're used to collecting, and sort of expecting different results with that same data set. Like, are we actually measuring the things that we intend to measure? And so I just put those out there for us to give thought to be very careful about what metrics we are asking and the burden that we are putting on LEAs, that we are only asking what we intend to really use, and being thoughtful about how we are identifying data sets that actually measure what we intend to measure.
Yes, absolutely. And I do I think part of what you said also affects the time when expectation, when we're going to expect certain things to have happened. And so setting of the targets is not just the actual metric, but the timeline for the metric. And to your point, it will take several years for student outcome data, certain types of data to really reflect the inputs of the changes in educational practices for students. And so, that's going to be a big consideration, I think, with the work group and as the AIB moves forward in terms of when to expect what. And also working with MSDE, absolutely the AIB will ultimately adopt the metrics and the targets that the AIB will be using to measure progress, but remaining aligned with MSDE and the state board in terms of not having different expectations, I think is really important. It doesn't mean that they might, MSDE might not choose to collect other information or to, watch other metrics, but being aligned around these higher level outcome measures and metrics and targets, I think is going to be critical so that there aren't different expectations.
Hey, Rachel,
Yes.
in the second bullet, there seems to me to be a group missing there, and that is CTE is such an important part of our operation, and we're thinking that a very substantial number of students are going to follow that pathway. So we would need, there'll be metrics associated with that. So we would need the Governor's Workforce Investment Board involved there as well, would we not?
For certainly, yes. I think that's a good thing to talk about, because part of, I think the CTE committee might also bring forward what they would suggest to be appropriate targets and metrics for the either to the work group or to the AIB.
Yeah, so I didn't want the CTE folks to think they were left out of this.
Thank you. Absolutely not. Would never. Just met with them and talked to them this morning.
And Rachel, I would actually add that I think that local governments also need to have representation, especially as we start to talk about implementing community schools and those CTE programs that are going to be really requiring both investment from local governments, but also those partnerships.
Yep. Excellent.
Rachel, can you go over what the proposed timeline, because this
Yes.
seems to be extremely important, and it also seems like there are many members. So, talk a little bit about the construction of this, how the membership will be comprised, and what the timeline is around this.
So we have here a lovely timeline that Emma made to show what the different activities, and really what our thought is that once we get the the initial plan adopted December 1st, then we could focus on identifying work group members. And I think we do have to be careful that it doesn't get too large, but we also want to make sure that it has all the representation that it needs. For the LEAs, we were thinking about, and we had some preliminary discussions with Dr. Stapleton about maybe trying to make sure that we have representation from large school systems, but also the smaller school systems that are going to have a little bit less capacity in some cases to collect additional data or things like that. So to make sure that we have the full picture of what's possible, or where we might need more resources to support LEAs if depending on what we're kind of data we're talking about. And so I think we'll have to sort of decide what the right size is for a group that, can actually, get work done. And then you can see that the bulk of the actual work would be start in January and essentially kind of run through May. Monthly meetings might not be enough at some point. And then the goal would be by May, and I was thinking about this more too. I think it could be done. There are overarching things, but then I think it could also be done by pillar. And so it could be so rather than releasing everything in May, that perhaps along the way we could have different pillars, drafts of different pillar measures and metrics and targets. Maybe the measures and metrics first and then the targets. So that's definitely open. The process and how that flows is definitely open to further discussion. But then the idea would be definitely holding those public working sessions similar to what we did this summer, so that we can really get the feedback and make sure that that we're not missing anything. And with again, August 1st is sort of our deadline. Dr. Stapleton?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, maybe it would be wise to have pillar-based workers. So that's not as large and a little bit more nimble, and have some people, I can go to all of the meetings, that overlap. So there's not duplicate effort, but I think that people will be so different that have a stake in the measures for each pillar.
Yeah, and maybe maybe just a smaller central group or something. Yeah, well, yeah. I think that probably does make sense. Any other questions, comments about targets? Obviously, we can come back to this, but
let me also emphasize one other point that you made, is that this is not written in the stone, that because it wasn't included initially in the more detailed format that we're talking about now, and we have a more dynamic process with an ongoing work group to help us flesh this out further, does not suggest that as we go forward over the years, that there may not be adjustments and changes based upon factors that we see that may suggest the necessity to make changes. And so the idea that you're forever forestall because you didn't see everything now, or that things may not be precise the way you think they should be in some later iteration, does not suggest that it will not be constantly reviewed and evaluated in a manner consistent with what we find as we go forward.
Absolutely.
Incidentally, Rachel, I do think this timeline is very helpful, and the discussion we've had has been very helpful in seeing how it all comes together.
Yeah, but it does not.
It's not locked in stone.
Not
Yeah,
carved in stone. Absolutely not.
Not preclude us from. It does not forestall us from it not meeting our other deadlines that were described in point. I think it's point 5 in the bullets there.
Yep. So maybe we'll move on to another theme from the public testimony was around the plan not incorporating fully the vision of the blueprint, and the aspirational goal of the blueprint. And so we wanted to address that. While the comprehensive plan itself isn't necessarily the blueprint itself is the vision, but I think that we are missing the sort of the words that pull it all together in the actual document. And so I am going to work on drafting a section to be added to the plan that really tries to bring out, you know, the full vision of the blueprint, why we're doing this, how critical it is that all the pillars work together, the systemness of it, that it's not just a series of, you know, checklists or compliance sort of things, but that really what the policies and strategies that are in the blueprint are intended to transform the state's education system. And that is a very heavy lift. And it's going to take time, and it's going to take, you know, it's messy, as we are all, you know, saying. It's not easy, but if it was easy, it probably would have already been done. And so that will definitely be an addition to the plan report document itself. And then there was also a lot of feedback about nearly all versus all students. And so absolutely the blueprint's goal is that all students would leave high school prepared for success in life, in work, in education. Absolutely. What that means in terms of by when and all the things that will be all the things that the work group we just talked about will need to grapple with. But absolutely, the blueprint's vision is for is to and the blueprint provides the resources, at least in theory, for all students to be able to achieve this goal. And so we wanted to state that very clearly, with no equivocation. And also, we also did in the draft plan state this repeatedly throughout the document, but I think it's worth saying again because of some of the public testimony, that whatever outcome measures, metrics, whatever data is determined to be used to evaluate progress is going to be disaggregated by student groups. We absolutely do not want to allow any student groups to sort of be hidden by averages. That's absolutely. And many of the outcome measures that we have identified in the draft right now, which are subject to changes by the work group as well, are, you know, closing the achievement gaps, not just raising, you know, CCR standards so that, you know, I'm just going to make up a number, you know, 85% of students are CCR by, you know, 2028. But we don't want just 80% of all students. We want 80% of every student group. So making sure that we're not hiding or allowing students to fall behind in the data because they're hidden in the data. That's a.
Let me add something here because I think it's worth noting. Whatever terminology we use, nearly all or the intended goal is for all. I have no doubt in my mind that this board, the Department of Education, all of the people who labored over the last few years to put this plan together our General Assembly members and everyone else who've been working on this, is that their heartfelt goal is to get all students intended to achieve success at the highest standards possible. To think otherwise would assume that we are in a deliberate fraud to the public and to everyone else who's been working on this. We can disagree about the semantics here and to make sure that we are clear, but the intent, the goal, the objective, in no way, shape, or form is diminished by the terminology that is utilized. To the degree that funding is not followed with a robust list of additional add-ons that will help us achieve that goal, does not mean that we will not seek additional changes as we go forward. So I think it does us a disservice in many ways to assume that because of the terminology and because of the people engaged in this process and whatever difference that we may have, that that is not what we intend to do. And so we can get tied up in the semantics and get lost in the trees for the forest. But I think we need to try to put this kind of an argument behind us, because I think they would only set us back. We have to assume that people are acting in good faith, that they put a great deal of work and effort into making this happen, and are not going to stand by and to not try to make certain that all kids throughout this entire system have an equal opportunity for success. We need to come to grips with that, because there may be some differences about the language, there may be some differences about some other aspects of it. This is not one of them. And I hope that we are clear about at least my intent and the intent of this board and everyone that I know that have worked on this process.
Rick, could I just, in support of that, Rachel, I like the way the second bullet is phrased.
Mhm.
And the only thing I would suggest is that the blueprint's goal is to ensure resources are allocated so that all Maryland students, regardless of where they live, and are prepared for success in life. I like the way that's phrased, but I think we ought, part of our responsibility is to assess the adequacy of resources to accomplish that, and to and be sure they're in place. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's a suggestion.
So are you suggesting, I just want to be clear, that the goal be restated? So the goal is that resources are allocated so that all students.
Well, that the resources are available so that all students, I mean, it wasn't that the
Mhm.
there's an adequacy of funding to accomplish this goal.
But let me ask you a question, Britt. Wouldn't that be limited though? Because it's more than just that the resources are there. It is also how the resources are ultimately allocated.
Well, so that the resources are available so that all students,
Okay.
regardless of where they live,
All
are successful. Now, maybe I'm raising a complication.
But I'm trying to get at it that you may be limited because you're making it continue just on resources. That's one element of it.
Right.
But it is also not just the resources, but it's also how resources are implemented. I mean, how distributed.
Where the resources are
to the plan
allocated and utilized.
Yeah.
So that all Maryland students. But Rachel, you had some hesitancy about mentioning the resources.
I had the same thought as the chair. So I think perhaps if we want to incorporate that, it would be like an add-on.
Yeah.
And that resources are allocated.
Yeah, there you go.
Adequate resources
that-
are allocated to achieve this goal or something.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Because you're right. I mean, the use of funds and is and monitoring that and ensuring that that the dollars are going where they should be going and need to be going is definitely part of the
And that they are adequate.
and if they're right, and recommending if determining whether there are sufficient resources,
Right.
and if there aren't, to recommend to the Governor and General Assembly the need for more resources. Absolutely. So we'll add that.
Well, let's assume everybody's okay with it.
Yes, right.
Well, we're not voting on it right now. It was added in. Everybody has a chance to look at it, and we'll
Thank
come
you.
back
Yeah.
Exactly.
and massage it, and the wording may be a little bit different, and then we'll take a final vote on it, Britt, and make sure we're okay. with it.
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay. The next slide, some of these are simpler. This would be one of them. We had a number of witnesses who asked for additional, in the plan, we identify who the key actors are to implement each pillar. And there was a request to add county governments and also students, families, and communities as key actors. And so that seems like a very appropriate request. And so we would propose that we would incorporate those additional actors where appropriate throughout the draft plan. And as the chair said, then you all will have the opportunity to see all the proposed changes and take a final vote on December 1st. And I think we captured all of the requested key actors. If there are others that are missing, please let us know.
Rachel, is the IAC considered a key actor? Is it it's already sort of incorporated into the blueprint, but we did hear that, and we know that the impact of capital.
They are already, I believe, and Emma will correct me if I'm wrong, identified as a key actor in Pillar 1.
But I think even beyond Pillar 1, in terms of thinking about community schools, thinking about CTE programs, capital investments, even when we think about having teachers who are only in front of the classroom 60% of the time, that ultimately means that we need to think about space differently.
Yeah.
So beyond just Pillar 1, I think that they are key actors.
Yeah, they certainly potentially are. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good flag. So we can add IAC throughout, at least 1 through 4. And obviously, if there are others later, just let us know. Then the next slide is sort of, again, the next theme from the public testimony was requests for really additional guidance and more on the how in terms of, and so we put, this is not a exhaustive list here, but these were many of those that were raised in the public hearing, where they were really seeking additional guidance around how to implement community schools in the best way. This mixed delivery system for pre-K, the CCR support and post-CCR pathways, the career ladder, the new career counseling program that is called for in the blueprint. And so we just wanted to identify these as areas where, and sort of trying to sort of think about the appropriate role of the AIB and MSDE in this work, that it would, generally, originate from MSDE. They are the State Department of Education, and they certainly have a lot of the expertise and staff who are very knowledgeable in these areas to develop guidance that we would then, in collaboration with the AIB, release guidance around these areas and other areas too. But these are the ones that sort of were the top of mind in the public hearing. On the pre-K in particular, there are we did get a lot of testimony about the difficulty in meeting the high quality requirements of having a certified teacher in every classroom right now. And we have been talking with MSDE to understand the process, and we're continuing to talk with them and sort through this. But the requirement for P3 certification actually in the blueprint law does not take effect until the 25-26 school year. So there was the blueprint law envisioned a transition period where providers would be able to upskill their staff while beginning to participate in the full day pre-K publicly funded system. And the right now, MSDE in their regulations require a certified teacher in every pre-K classroom. So we have a misalignment between the current regulations of MSDE and what the blueprint law is calling for. And so that is something that will need to be sorted out. But ultimately, we absolutely want certified P3 teachers in every classroom, as well as teaching assistants that have the additional associate degree or CDA credential. And so, what is really clear is that there's an urgent need for pathways to be developed so that staff at childcare providers who are, leading the classes, the teachers and the teaching assistants have the real ability to achieve the standards that we're asking them to achieve within the time frame. And this is going to require really working really closely with higher education to make these programs more available, both available because we have a very limited number of P3 and CDA programs, and also available in flexible times because we're talking about folks who are working and aren't able to attend during the day, or else we need to develop a way to essentially give them release time so that they can pursue the additional certification that they need.
Let me add into this, Rachel, because I walked away from this section dealing with the community providers somewhat perplexed here, because there's a ongoing upcoming challenge that we can find ourselves in a catch-22. On one hand, many of the witnesses were complaining about the time frame for a number of things that they are asked to do in order to improve their standards, their facilities, their teachers, and what have you, and to have them at a level that I think our plan requires. On the other hand, we heard from our local schools to say, we don't have adequate space, we don't have sufficient personnel in order to accommodate the ongoing demands that we see coming. So if on one hand, you have people saying that they can't meet the requirements and it presents a dilemma for them, on the other hand, saying we don't have the room, the space, and all the other things to accommodate what we already have, there's a huge conflict there. And in some way, we need to be realistic about that and figure out a way to provide some type of appropriate transition in order to allow it to happen. Otherwise, we're caught in this lurch, in this catch-22, unable to absorb the additional students that will be required, that we need in order to meet the requirements, and the providers not able to fulfill their requirements for the new certification requirements. Something has to give here.
Yes.
And that's the theme that I heard going back to the individual points that you've just made.
Clearly what we're doing isn't working, is what I would say.
Well, we're not at that point yet, but that is coming to a head pretty soon.
What I mean is what literally is being done now, which is not complete, which is not aligned with the blueprint, is not working. Yes, yes. So, what we're suggesting is that we would actually, in the draft plan, we would actually incorporate, and these would become things that MSD and AIB would need to do, is develop this guidance around this list.
Rachel, with
Yes.
regard to the alternative pathways, it sounded to me, and I may be wrong, that there weren't enough certified teachers, but I'm not sure that there's the demand for the alternative. I mean, I didn't hear evidence regarding, we have people who want to become certified teachers in the pre-K space, who cannot find a pathway, and that may exist, but I don't know. So I'm just worried that we're assuming if we build a pathway, they will come, when maybe there is a very small supply of people who want to take on those jobs in this pre-COVID space.
Well,
I would
and
say on that,
Post-COVID.
that, I'm in the recruitment business. I think you got to ask people if you want people to serve. And so I think that's a little bit of a fallacy of like, because there's no pathway, there's no latent demand. I think people react and respond and express interest when they perceive a pathway. So I think we got to like create the door in the pathway and then make sure we're communicating that opportunity so folks know how to get in line for it. I personally don't wait around for things that don't have a door available to me, saying, I wish there was a door here available to me. Like, I'm out living my life, doing my thing.
Mhm.
yeah, I sort of to build on what Mr. Harris just said, I was going to say, I think right now we have to try to attract more students and adults into traditional prep programs that will, increase our pipeline of P3 certified teachers. But what we have to work with right now are the existing staff within the private provider community and in some cases school systems for teaching assistants, and really think about how we can support and incentivize and encourage them to pursue the additional credential, and make it as easy as possible for them to do that, so that we're able to expand our full day pre-K program in the way that we want to do.
I also think we have good comps in other industries. If you look in healthcare and you look at certified nurses assistants, for example, or nurse techs, like there's been a lot of work to create more equitable pathways, more inclusive pathways. And then you see commensurate demand, particularly from communities that historically been underrepresented in healthcare. And so I agree, Rachel, like, I think we just need to prioritize creating these pathways. I think it should be apparent to all of us that there is a massive care economy that is predominantly people of color and women who are out there in underpaid roles, caring for our children, caring for our elderly, caring for us. who would love to have a professional pathway to get credentialed and get on a ladder and see their prospects increase and go up over time. That they're not vocally asking for it is an indictment of us, not of them, in my opinion. I think we got to make the case that it's available to them and we want them here.
And to that point in the draft plan, there is guidance. We need to help because I think that there's a perception that we're asking folks to, get additional credentials and that there isn't a benefit to them. But as Mr. Harris just said, there's a huge benefit. I mean, the incentive to earn better pay, be on more of a professional path. I think it will be very appealing to folks if they understand that what the benefits are of it. And it's not just another ask that they're, being, required to do in order to keep their jobs. And that requires a lot of, I think, outreach and sharing of information so that it's understood that this is not just a benefit for the education system. It can be a really critical benefit for the providers and for their staff. I did want to bring up a couple things. I think Mr. Manko, you're suggesting some other examples, some other guidance that we might want to include in the plan itself would be around use of collaborative time or non-instructional time. Absolutely. And then also apprenticeship models. And on apprenticeship models, I just wonder if that would be something that MSDE would do or something that the CTE committee would do. Since it falls more under the CTE committee's role.
Yeah, I guess I was just unclear on whether this was an exhaustive list or if there were additional things that, because I know these things had been kind of percolating within conversations that I've had with folks in the field as areas where there's, additional need for best practices, differing approaches to what they're currently doing. So just wanted to elevate those if we were looking to expand this list to be more inclusive of other things that we've heard outside of just what's been submitted through the written.
No, absolutely. So I think what we want to do is this is not an exhaustive list. But if we are going to add these to the draft plan as an expectation, both for guidance and, all of these topics are also areas for technical assistance as well. That if there are others that we want to specifically add to the draft plan, that you should raise those either now or through comments later. So I've got the use of collaborative time. That's a very important one. And then on apprenticeships, I'm just wondering if we would want to task MSDE with that or if the CTE committee. And the superintendent is a member of the CTE committee. So, MSDE is represented on the CTE committee as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think either route. But I think you're correct in that this is also providing us the roadmap for particular areas where technical assistance is, highly desirable and, provides the roadmap for things that we should be supporting those who are submitting plans, particularly the LEAs over the upcoming months prior to the March submission deadline.
Right. And that, of course, the draft plan is really about the future, and a lot of this technical assistance are things that we need to provide as much as possible between now and then, particularly for things that that need to happen in the next year. Yep.
Rachel, I don't know if this is something it's something that's ongoing, but I would think fiscal technical assistance, especially as the modeling has changed, to help LEAs understand as they go into this more transparent system and as there becomes more accountability down to the school-based level, to think differently about how they're deploying their fiscal resources and then how to be reporting that as well.
Yep. We have been, AIB and MSD have been meeting with the chief financial officers weekly and talking through a lot of that. But I agree. I think that's an excellent addition.
Hey, Rachel.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we had I thought you arranged a very productive conversation with Linda Darling Hammond on the career ladder. And, she has observed and done research on and thought about career ladders at a very high level across the country. And she made the point that that how important it is to have each rung be associated with the acquisition of some new capability. And that not only did you get this new capability, but there were opportunities for you to provide the benefit of that new ability in the classroom. It just was so compelling to me and listening to her that and I know the LEAs are working on the career ladder or have been. Maybe they've turned their attention elsewhere at the moment, but how do we get that kind of guidance out there? Anyway, I just giving the LEA, we don't want the career ladders to have widely different standards for advancement across the state. I mean, I know they're going to be negotiated with the collective bargaining units, but there ought to be some guidelines that are common to all these career ladders, it would seem to me, because teachers are going to move from one jurisdiction to another. So any thoughts about this at this point?
Yeah, I do recall that. And I recall being happy thinking that we had actually incorporated that in the blueprint law as part of the framework for the career ladder.
Does it say that in the law?
It does.
Oh, thank goodness. I'm glad to hear that.
It lays
I
out.
didn't realize it actually said that. Okay, good.
Yeah. And so I think, again, it's convenings, it's bringing folks together to talk about questions, to ask questions, to talk with experts, to really fully understand what the blueprint law says, what it envisions, and then and I don't think we're there yet. We haven't even covered that part yet. But then it's sort of like, how do you operationalize that in a career ladder? But I feel like we need to just do additional talking about what the career ladder that the law envisions and literally states in the law what it lays out. And that is in the draft plan.
Well, that's good. Then that's I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Manco?
Yeah, I wonder if one thing that's maybe not explicit in the draft plan that we had heard through the testimony last week, and maybe this is coming up in future slides, but this idea that if a career ladder is not able to be negotiated amongst the kind of local entities, if there is a kind of default setting where they automatically this kind of default career ladder would be put in place, which to me seemed like a very kind of reasonable and pragmatic approach if things can't be negotiated at the local level. But I don't know where other people on the board stand on that, and if that was going to be kind of brought up here. But since we were on the topic of career ladders and we were talking about, basically a minimum standard that's a floor that's established in the legislation and in the in the comprehensive plan, what more needs to be done to basically signal that's a default status if things can't be more robustly negotiated at the local level.
Yeah, I made note of that too, and I thought that was an interesting suggestion. It's not on any of these slides right now. I do think we would need to talk with MSDE and PSTEB, and also this has implications under collective bargaining law that I think we need to understand, and not do anything to undermine the intent of the blueprint law, which is that these be negotiated locally with their teachers unions. So I think we need to do a little more investigation on that and whether that's a possibility.
Rachel, do we state that anywhere specifically that the career ladders need to be negotiated with the collective bargaining unit?
I sure hope so.
Okay.
I believe we do. I think it's
certainly in the blueprint, isn't it?
certainly in the blueprint.
Yeah.
So we'll double check and make sure that it's very explicit.
Yeah, I just thought I remembered in the testimony last week that someone thought that it wasn't, so.
That it wasn't.
That it wasn't explicit or it wasn't identified with the collective bargaining. I may be wrong, just something that
Okay.
came up.
On the career ladder, there was,
On the
I do
career ladder.
recall, okay. I know there were some, Cheryl Bose gave some other examples that she thought were subject to collective bargaining that weren't clear.
Okay,
But I didn't think I don't recall the career ladder being one.
that may be what I'm getting mixed up with,
It
so.
might be, she talked about like the family coordinators for in the English
Mhm,
language learners,
and
and
the
that should be
coordinators.
subject to collective bargaining.
Yep, that's what I was.
Okay, is that what you were thinking of? Okay.
Mhm, yep.
So obviously we're going to come back to all of these things as we work on the revised draft, but moving on to the next slide. This is really, and again, these are examples, but a good amount of the feedback that we did receive in the public hearing really was asking the AIB and through the blueprint comprehensive plan to alter the law, which is not possible. And so we just wanted to provide some examples of some of the.
No, let me make a slight correction there, because I don't want people to say it's not possible to alter the
It's
law.
not possible to change it through the blueprint comprehensive plan.
Okay,
It needs
yeah,
to- It requires a legislative change.
Right, thank you.
Yes. And just to circle back to the beginning, and the AIB does have the ability to recommend legislative changes to the Governor and General Assembly through the annual report. And so it's not saying that these aren't things that could change in the future, but it's right now, the ask is to change things and address things that would really require changes to the law. And so we have some examples here. Hopefully none that are very surprising. But particularly on fine arts, I did want to note that there are a number of references in the blueprint law to the use of funds for fine arts education and the importance of fine arts education. So the blueprint did not ignore fine arts, but if there were a desire to include fine arts as part of the college and career ready standard, that would clearly require a change to the law. So as well as, changing the timeline for the high quality standards to be met by the pre-K providers, increasing funding. We had several witnesses testify about the requirement that assistant principals teach a portion of the time. And that is in the law. So changing that would require legislative change. We had a number of witnesses talk about under the blueprint law, at some date in the future, when the AIB determines that that the pathways have been implemented, students who are not college and career ready are not intended to participate in the post CCR pathways. There's no date certain set in the law. It is up to the AIB to make that determination. But we did have a number. And so for now, students who are not CCR ready are able to participate in the post CCR pathways. But we did have a number of witnesses say that they thought that that should always be the case. And again, that would require ultimately legislation whenever the AIB determines that the time has come. We also
just
had
take a second on that one, Rachel,
Sure.
though, because the CCR pathways, if I'm correct, they've not been set correct? So I mean, I think
Correct.
part of the assumption is that post CCR pathways include things like dual enrollment or apprenticeships, and so that students would be excluded from those opportunities. That's not necessarily true because we haven't actually defined what is and is not inclusive in the definition of a post CCR pathway.
The statute's pretty clear. Now there is, I think, an open question as to whether any dual enrollment falls under a post CCR pathway or whether it's more of a planned set of dual enrollment courses. So I do think there is some some unknown there for sure on dual enrollment. It is more clear that early college programs and CTE and apprenticeship pathways are post CCR pathways in the statute right now. But that doesn't necessarily mean that certain like career exploration and those types of classes don't necessarily fall within the post CCR pathway, if that's the kind of thing you're thinking. I think that's right. What it actually means and which exact courses fall into the pathway or not into the pathway remains to be determined. Yeah.
And Rachel, somewhat related to that, we received feedback last week and in other places about including multiple measures to determine CCR. And would that be an example that falls under requiring legislative change?
Yes. Yes, it would.
Okay.
And we should add that to this list because you're right. We have received that feedback repeatedly, and the blueprint law does right now specifically refer to an assessment that is a standardized assessment of some type. So that would require a change. And on that point, I did want to let you know that the Board of Public Works approved the contractor for the CCR study that MSDE is contracting for yesterday, and the American Institutes for Research, AIR, received the award, and I have asked MSDE for some additional information to share with you, and I will share as soon as we receive it, and it's possible that I have it now in my email, but I haven't looked.
Rachel, on that note, what you just said took me by surprise. So I'd love to, if you could point me toward the language that specified that it was a single assessment. Given that the study as designed in that RFP that MSD put out included investigating the use of multiple measures to identify folks who would be successful in college and career. That seems to be a total mismatch between the goals of that study and this legislative requirement.
There is a mismatch, yes.
All right, I think that we should have, I mean, they showed us their plan. I think we should have identified that mismatch if that had been legislated. So I would just love to see the actual specifics. I'll try to look for it myself right now, but I'd like to see the language.
Happy to share it with you. And we did point that out to MSD at the time. And, ultimately, the study incorporates both what the law set out to be part of the CCR study and the additional piece that the superintendent wanted to include in the study regarding looking at data around predictive use of multiple measures.
Okay, I mean, because that, I would certainly, if they find something is very successful and it's not an assessment, I would certainly advocate for a change in the legislation. If that's the case.
I think we'll have to see what, yep. Just making a quick note. Okay, and then the next slide is just and we just wanted to acknowledge that we heard the comments and the feedback, and that there were a number of statements that were made about things that the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan did not include that actually are in the draft plan. So we just wanted to acknowledge this and sort of clarify for folks who made those comments that there are provisions in the Blueprint law and in the comprehensive plan around, and this, again, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is a good sample of the types of items that were raised. And I will highlight the third item, and we've talked about this, that the AIB is one of the very few changes that the AIB is recommending for the statute this session will be a technical correction to the full day pre-K formula, so that students with disabilities and English learner students and also students experiencing homelessness will be included in the enrollment count for full day pre-K, so that those students that are enrolled, the LEAs and the providers actually receive the funding for those students. So it's a clear oversight, technical correction to the law. Mr. Manko?
Yeah, so this clarifications page has kind of brought up some, I guess a lot of thinking that I've been doing around, I think the staff has done a tremendous job breaking down, this, very large piece of legislation into, I think initially the implementation graphics and then ultimately the comprehensive implementation plan in a manner that the public can go through and it's accessible and understandable. And I think that's, that's been really something that I've been really proud of being part of the board. And I think you guys have done just a wonderful job with that. I think the one piece that I feel like has been missing, and, it made me think about this when we were looking at the clarifications, is do we have the same document or the ability to create a same document that basically breaks down the dollar allocation. Because I think that's where there is still a lot of kind of mystery and confusion is, when we talk about the blueprint does include, programs to address pandemic related learning loss through summer school and tutoring. Like, what are we talking about? How many dollars is this? Like, what is the, I guess getting a better understanding of like, what is in the foundation amount? What does that break down to per pupil? What is that supposed to be for? And I know this is probably like a massive charge that is, beyond what you were expecting to be asked for on this. But I think it would help for the public to understand better, of the dollars that have been assigned to this legislation, how much of it is going to, help with building out apprenticeships, what portion of that is allocated for the support pathways, what portion of that is for Judy centers or Patty centers, or any of the numerous portions of the legislation. Like, what actually are the dollar amounts that are tied to this? And it seems like maybe it makes sense to break it down on a per pupil basis, but maybe it doesn't easily break down that way. But just getting a better understanding of actually where the dollars are going, and and using that as kind of a proxy of how we're going through and prioritizing things.
Yeah, I think that was so. In these meetings with the CFOs that we've been participating in, we have been essentially walking through with them the very questions that you're asking. And we are actually working on, so for the foundation program, and for the most part, they're all per pupil amounts anyway. They build up to totals based on enrollment, but they're per pupil amounts. The foundation program has specific resources for various pieces of the blueprint, and that was identified sort of at full implementation. What we don't have is the year-to-year breakout of that, and so we're actually working on that right now. So that is something that we will have available. And I've been thinking about this a little bit too. Obviously, the funding side of it is also very important, and was very involved in that. And trying to think about like the most helpful way to put that data together that will make sense, because it's so complicated. But no, I think that's a fair request. And it's definitely on the to-do soon list. Like, we're hoping to have the foundation breakout available at least for the next couple of years in after December 1st. So not to include in the plan, but we can certainly work on providing all that information, and being transparent for the public about all of that as we move forward. And I think Dr. Stapleton had also mentioned in her logic model, which made me smile, identifying the resources. And we've been working on a spreadsheet that tries to do that as well, by I think by task. So we are trying to build that out also at the same time. Mr. Harris?
On the provision for LEAs to spend some of these dollars instead of schools, are we worried about that crowding out the urgency on having a workable community schools strategy at the LEA level, so that the schools can metabolize the money and put it to work?
So, and I think you're back on the previous slide, right? That would be a change in the law. Yeah, there were a number of I think blueprint coordinators who sort of said that they either need the ability to use a portion of the concentration poverty grant funds or additional dollars that would not, if additional money was provided, that would help them support the concentration of poverty, the community schools, and the concentration in poverty grants. That was definitely a theme in the request. It does right now, what the law allows is for school systems that have 40 or more community schools or concentration of poverty schools. The LEA is permitted to allocate 50% of the funds. So they can actually and the concept is sort of economies of scale. If you have a significant number of schools in a district that are going to be utilizing wraparound services, that there might be a benefit to having more of it organized and contracted for at the system level than at the school level. And so that is what the law allows for now. I have heard, I don't know that it was specifically in the testimony last week that perhaps that provision should be applied to all the LEAs. And again, that would require a change in the law. I agree with you. I think it is a slippery slope.
Rachel, let me just say that, as you will recall on the commission, this was the commission felt very strongly that there not enough of the money was going down to the school level. And that's why it wrote in this recommendation, which ultimately made it into the blueprint. So it isn't a change I would want to think about very hard for that reason.
And I will say, I do think that from the blueprint coordinator's perspective, you know, if it were additional dollars, so not necessarily taking from what the schools would get, but giving the LEAs funding to support their community schools, I think that was part of their feedback or request. We're almost done. The next slide are other updates and changes. So these are just some other pieces of testimony that didn't fit into some of those other categories or themes that we were trying to highlight. And so the first two here are really related to the CTE pathways and the CTE committee. And so one piece of feedback was to clarify in the comprehensive plan that apprenticeships are industry credentials. And I mean, that is correct. Apprenticeships are a credential. The way that the law sort of lays it out is sort of it makes them a more distinct, their own sort of category, apprenticeships, rather than lumping them into the industry credential. But I think we can work on clarifying that in the plan. And then another thing related to CTE was the allocation of Perkins funds. So the blueprint law actually required MSDE to apply for a waiver so that the CTE committee would be responsible for administering Perkins funds, which are federal career and technical education funds. As it turns out, there is not a waiver process for that. And so MSDE remains the sole administrator of the Perkins funds. And so the request was to incorporate into the blueprint plan a provision that would essentially make sure that the CTE committee is part of the process of determining how Perkins funds are being allocated, and that it not just be an MSDE's role. And I think actually I think this is actually not as accurate as it could be. You know, the request was that the CTE committee administer Perkins funds. Again, the process for that, at least with the federal government, is not clear that there's a path to that, but clearly the CTE committee and MSDE could enter into an agreement where they define their roles and you know, responsibilities around this. So that could be a change to the current draft plan. And then there was also feedback around pointing out that cultural competency is not defined anywhere in the blueprint, which is correct. It is stated a number of times in the law, but not actually defined. And so looking at the blueprint law, though, the State Board of Education and PSEB are required to define cultural competency, particularly as it relates to what teacher preparation programs would be incorporating into their curriculum and standards. And so one potential change to the draft would be essentially using that definition, which I don't believe has been promulgated yet, but that once that is defined, that would become the definition that would be used by all the entities implementing the blueprint. So that was one suggestion. And then another is we also had a number of witnesses talk about the importance of restorative practices in schools, and you know, as Dr. Kerwin could also talk about, that was the commission spent a lot of time talking about learning about restorative practices, trauma-informed practices, and it definitely was part of the blueprint, but it was primarily part of the blueprint in terms of making sure that new teachers were trained in these practices. And there was less emphasis in the blueprint on the training of existing teachers and staff, which is obviously very important. And so another suggestion for the plan would be to make sure that MSDE, as they're designing the new system of professional development for teachers, that they would include training in restorative practices, trauma-informed practices, and cultural competency for all teachers, not just new teachers that would receive it through the teacher preparation programs. And then if there are no questions or comments on that, the last slide is really just the next steps. We are continuing to receive written testimony and feedback, and we will be accepting that through the November 23rd, which is the day before Thanksgiving. So everyone can get their written feedback in and then have a good holiday. We would ask, we've provided the bit.ly link here, and you all have this in the documents that have been posted. So that is the feedback form. So you can either sort of write your own written testimony, you know, free form on a piece of paper and email it to us, or you can fill out the feedback form. We are closely monitoring that every day. And I'm just going to go back to the beginning and remind myself, we've received a total of 108 pieces of written testimony or written feedback from to date on the draft plan. The feedback that we have received is posted on the AIB website, and we actually incorporated, and by we I mean my staff who are very technically proficient, a QR code here that you can just use your phone camera to scan that, and that will take you to the Google Drive that has all of the written testimony and feedback that we have received to date. I mentioned that we're holding the feedback sessions with the LEAs on the revised template and criteria. We'll be following up with MSDE to determine what we would recommend in terms of changes to the template and criteria for success for the AIB's consideration and approval on December 1st. And there are some changes that we already have identified to align the template with the plan, because the template was fine. Well, the revised template was available after the draft plan was available. And so there are a few places where we things that are in the template need to have connecting pieces in the draft plan. So we'll bring those to you on or before December 1st. And then, of course, we'll meet again on December 1st.
Okay, there are any additional questions or comment from the board?
Mr. Manco?
Yeah, so I'm sorry if I missed this, but was there a place where we clarified what our expectations were from the various entities, particularly the LEAs, around what the expectations were around public engagement? Because I know we have tried to model the way, but I don't know, were we explicit in terms of they should be engaging communities in this way? There should be these different apparatuses established to acquire feedback, to understand what are some of the challenges and opportunities that exist within each of their communities that would help them in the construction of their localized plan?
There are definitely requirements in the template for the LEAs to provide how they did engage with the public and with various segments of their communities. There was initially MSD had proposed requiring certain specific membership of their blueprint writing teams. That requirement is not in the template anymore, but the suggestion of who to be engaging with and who should be part of the writing team is still in the template. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, just out of curiosity, do we know why I clearly we want to provide some level of flexibility, but I did feel like the prescription that MSDE had assigned in terms of at least this many parents should be involved, and at least this many community members have to be involved in the development of the plan. I guess it's all our hopes that this is just this is an expectation at this time, and the LEAs understand that they should be doing that at all points. But what does happen if they opt to do just like the kind of bare minimum to get feedback from their communities?
So there are criteria for success associated with the public engagement. So it would be a determination about whether an LEA had fallen so short of what was expected that their plan could not be approved pending additional public engagement and potential revisions to their plan. That would certainly be an option or a possibility.
Hey, Rachel,
Mhm.
on December 1st, we're going to have a lot to do.
Yes.
We're going to have to approve this plan. And so, I think it's a huge lift to get it all ready. I know that. On the other hand, I think the board members are going to need several days to really pour over this document because this is a huge moment for us. So do you have any thought about when this might come to the board members?
That's an excellent question. I think probably what would be the most helpful is if it not all come at the same time. So I think we
I think that
can,
would be fun. Yeah.
so I think what we can try to do is share drafts. We just need to think about the least confusing way to provide multiple versions of documents to you, with essentially with track changes in them. And so we might be able to think about providing the biggest piece of the draft plan are the pillars. And so we might be able to kind of think about staging it with by pillar so that you could receive, so that you might have.
Be helpful.
Yeah. So let us think about that. And then obviously the template and criteria for success would probably come at a different time than pieces of the draft plan. But I fully understand. I think so Thursday, December 1st is on a Thursday. It is the week after Thanksgiving. And so we do have the crunch of the holiday falling in our timeline here as well. But we will work to get you as much as we can, as early as we can.
Okay. We'd probably like to get it, as you said before, in various components over a period of time with the idea that you get it all in as quickly as we possibly can. When will we share that component with the public?
I think it would be hard to share it with the public much before December 1st.
Okay.
Particularly if you all are giving us feedback to the revisions we're making.
Okay. Well, as I indicated in the earlier sessions, we are really crunched for time, and we've tried to accommodate as much openness, transparency as possible. It has been extraordinary, the amount of participation that we've had from a variety of entities in the public, but it's impossible for us to move this process forward and meet all of our expectations. And so there may be a little bit of disappointment that we can't get it to you as quickly as you may like. But when you look at how comprehensive this plan is and the number of entities that we have to coordinate with in order to make sure that we dot all the I's and cross all the T's, taking into consideration all of the feedback that we received thus far, it is a tremendous task. So I want to thank Rachel and her staff and others who worked with her in order to provide us with this amount of information, which even with those conditions is extraordinary, I think, and your staff and yourself should be credited for the huge amount of work that you've accomplished thus far. Any other question? Well, that's it for you, Britt. You had another question?
No, I have no other question. No.
Joe, you would that finish for your question? Okay, if not, then we have a motion to, nope, sorry. We probably need to read the statement. We're going to go into an executive session and we'll adjourn from the executive session. Rachel, would you read the statement for us, please?
Yep. So the motion would be to adjourn to an executive session in accordance with the Maryland Open Meetings Act to discuss a personnel matter, receive legal advice from our counsel, discuss the fiscal 24 budget, and perform certain administrative functions.
Okay, is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Moved and second. All in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition to it? Hearing none, the motion carries. We will rejoin in 5 minutes, and there's a different link that you have to get on to get into the executive session. Thank you.